All right. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Financial Clarity Live. I'm your host, Josh Notes. I want to thank my guest, Phil Maffey, CFO at Sustain CFO, and Augie Manzella, our esteemed financial analyst at Sustain CFO. Thank you guys for joining. All right. So today we're going to be jumping right in to KPIs and the metrics that matter most. But today, welcome to Financial Clarity Live. We're here to transform the way you think about your business finances. This isn't just a numbers game. It's about clarity, it's about strategy, and it's about taking control. So over the next 25 to 30 minutes, we're going to demystify the financial planning process, show you why FP&A matters, and how it can unlock your business's true potential. Together, we'll cut through the noise, focus on what matters, and arm you with the tools to make smarter and sharper decisions. Let's dive in. All right, so metrics that matter most, KPIs that every business owner should know. Phil, you really have enlightened me over the past decade on how KPIs tell you what's going to happen before it actually happens. Maybe a story. I don't know. You got a situation, a story. You want to name one of your kids or your cats like KPI? Tell me about KPIs and why they matter.
That's a good one. Yeah, I mean, it's all the rage, right? You kind of hear this term. A lot of our clients, they're like, "Oh, I need to see my KPIs," but they don't necessarily know, what they are or what they should be, looking at, right? And I think that's, ultimately why they called us. And what we're doing as a part of all of our engagements during the onboarding is to understand for your business which numbers matter most, right? It's not going to be, I've got the same client. I want to see, constant different slices and dices of the numbers, and ultimately kind of got him to a place where it's like there's only going to be a handful of things that are really moving the needle. We need to identify what those are and make sure we're tracking them correctly. So a lot of the times it's going to be, I don't even know what I should be looking at, and we'll help identify that. And every now and again, it's a client who, they think they need 55 million different slices of dices of the data, but what it really boils down to is they just need the right KPIs that are going to be giving them the things that they need to be looking at day in and day out, their finger on the pulse, right? So, I
Beautiful.
don't know if I'm naming any animals after it, but
okay, get to that later, right? But ultimately, what we're talking about, right, is that you have information, data, and it's telling you. I mean, if you just said, profitability, like there's a reason that you got to that. Everything ends up flowing to that. So when we're thinking about the perspective of time, key indicators tend to either be leading or lagging. Augie, can you give us some insight into how a business owner out there is like, okay, I can kind of think about that, but it makes my brain hurt. How do they know whether it's a leading or a lagging indicator and why it matters?
So a leading indicator would be something like marketing spend, a future trend. Something that would be a lagging indicator would be customer satisfaction, or basically something that measures the outcome of your efforts. You want to be sure that you're looking in both directions to tie your KPIs to an actionable real life outcome and not just be another graph.
Absolutely. And you talked about driving outcomes. I think we're also talking about driving accountability, right? If we're talking about bonus structures, if we're talking about, variable pay incentive structures, you can do a lot by tying, like if you want somebody to focus on something, tie how they get paid to it and make them look at it. And, that will change behavior. In a capitalistic society, which we are blessed to live in, that is probably one of the best ways to change behavior other than, removing toxicity. So, we know that these KPIs tend to be the cornerstones of the success of the business if it's measured right. But, I think the question is, how do you now choose what the right ones are for your business? So we've got a couple here, but Phil, tell me how you make this choice as a CFO when you're building out the model for the entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think ultimately the client's business is going to dictate the need for these kinds of KPIs. But a good one on this list I'll kind of key in on is the gross margin, right? So I think all of our clients, we talk about one of the most ubiquitous KPIs is going to be gross margins, right? And those are super important because they'll give you a sense of what your operating capital looks like, after you scale your revenue. So for an example, you make $100 million and you have 50% gross margin, right? You're making $50 million. If you scale that up to $1 billion, right? That 50% should hold true more or less. And then that'll give you a sense of, back of the envelope, if I grow $1 million in revenue, I should expect to grow $500,000 of gross margin. And then your gross margin less your OpEx, right, is going to be what cash is left, at the bottom line. So, one of the things we always make sure, and that's going to be a function of capturing the correct variable costs in the cost of goods sold to be able to generate an accurate gross margin. So, I think that's probably one of the more ubiquitous KPIs that we're making sure that our clients understand cold and, more importantly, understand how they're trending and how they control, things like, kind of alluding to other versions of this where, costs are going up for raw materials or cost of labor goes up. And then how do you maintain those margins in light of that? And, things like cost increases and passing those costs along are going to be an important balance to maintain your gross margin efficiencies.
Yeah. And, if there's a business owner out there, right, maybe they're a little too small or they don't feel like they can make the investment in a team of, financial leaders like ours, that's okay. We welcome you to these calls. That's what it's for, is to teach you what you can do yourself before you're ready for bringing on, a fractional team that can deliver this type of, expertise month in, month out. So if you're looking at your business model and you're sitting here going, well, how do I know what's the right KPI? Sure. Gross margin. Thank you. Should have known that one. But tell me, do you think about this chronologically? Okay, tell me exactly how your business works from when you just start educating to marketing to sales, all the way to providing whatever service or product you do, the production of that widget or that service, all the way to collecting the cash and then depositing that in the bank account and turning that back around to make payroll. Is that the exercise, Phil? Is it really a thought process based around time?
I don't know if I would use the term time, but I think what you're alluding to is kind of the end-to-end economics of a business. Everything from, the customer thinking about making a purchasing decision to the cash flowing in the door, right? And we look to see which parts of those processes are the most prone to complexity, the most prone to errors. And that's generally where the KPIs you're going to be choosing are focused, so that you're keeping a microscope on the areas of the business with the most complexity and the most, likelihood of things going awry, or if they're not managed properly, then you're going to have big issues downstream, right? So we'll use an example of a client that we work with through an M&A transaction who made a lot of money in very small increments, and understanding his receivable cycles and revenue per customer and things like that were super important, because there was just a lot of complexity that went on the top line of things, right? Where maybe different clients who only have a handful of customers, that's not their biggest concern. It's more in other areas of the business. So it's definitely going to be dictated by what parts of the business from that end-to-end economic cycle that you've alluded to are going to be, is it getting paid? Is it invoicing customers? Is it managing resources to service those customers, right? Whatever the business is telling us is ultimately going to be what we focus those metrics around.
All right, so let's talk about bringing the team together, and no one better on our team to talk about this than Augie, because you do a really good job of this, even if it's a little bit in the background. How do you, what role do you see in the dashboards? We got one on the screen here. The dashboards bringing the team together. How do you see alignment occur in real time with this?
Dashboards make it convenient for people to, especially nowadays with a lot of remote work. It's very easy to have everything in one place that's accessible anywhere you can get internet access. People can, in their spare time, double check things without having to get permission or let into a certain part of where the records are. And it allows collaboration in real time where everyone's looking at the same thing, and it's pretty clear cut.
Yeah, I think we've shifted, I think, culturally in a business environment. I think probably in our parents' generation, it was pretty common for none of the financials to be shared with anyone on the team. It was kind of this back office, smoky room conversation amongst the executives, and then Christmas bonuses may or may not come. I think the world has changed. I think radical transparency is taking hold. Whether folks want that or not, I'm not saying that every business needs to do that. But if you don't want to share all the numbers, if you don't want to share profitability, you can share the things that are driving profitability and tie incentives to it. And then it's really doing just the same good, right? Because if people do not know what's going on, then fear will kick in and they'll be worried that things are not working out and they should be looking for another job. So this will end up costing you one way or another as the business owner if you're not allowing your team to see something. So we think aligning the team around KPIs is really important. And, we have an ability in our business to help our clients by being able to shape their KPI dashboards for really exactly what they want. And we can even shape the views of that based on the audience. So you might show your investors one thing and you might show your marketing team another. But now to the bigger point, it's not just about looking at dashboards and getting excited, right? It's about unlocking the potential using the right tools here and spending really as little bit of time as possible to get the results you're looking for. So I guess, Phil, how do financial software solutions enhance KPI tracking and decision-making just in what you've seen over your 20-year plus career in finance?
Yeah, there's definitely been an evolution of the pervasiveness of what those reports look like, as Augie alluded to, right? Our clients are getting a cloud-based solution so that all they need is access to the internet, and they can ultimately pull these things up and look at them. And the way that we design them is to ultimately around KPIs and making sure that the most important information is front and center, right? A lot of the times I think folks get bogged down with too much data. And what I like about our approach to this is that it takes the things that matter the most and puts them in front of the people that need to be looking at them, right? And we can customize this accordingly. So maybe certain people in the business don't need individual salary information. So we can set different levels of visibility into the financials so that everyone can see what they need to see, but maybe not more than they should be seeing. So, and I think it's kind of designing different dashboards for different departments within the business, different leadership, investor relations, whatever it may be. It's just a way to take all of that information that matters most and put it in a place where everyone has easy access to it at their fingertips.
Yeah, and I think helping the group and the organization understand, maybe it depends on the business, right? If this is an online business, maybe the sales dashboard is updated every day, every minute, whatever it is, because those sales are ticking in. But if this is real estate business, let's say, and has rentals, and really it's about cash collection in the beginning, and then what the costs are at the end of the month. This might be more of like hitting this tight kind of window where we need the books to close by the 18th day of the month. We've got a board meeting on the 21st, and we need to make sure that this information in just those 3 days, and 2 of them might be a weekend, flows across. So I think each one of these scenarios for the business on when to check and when it's the most relevant is dependent on the business model, but the tools and techniques should really be pretty similar from what we've seen. Let's talk about driving growth, using collaboration. We've tapped on this a little bit. I guess I'm going to start at the top as the playing the owner's role here, right? Is that owners, I've heard, should constantly be repeating the vision, almost to a level of like, is that all this guy thinks about? Because if they're not saying it, no one else is. And if they're not repeating it and clarifying it and making slight alterations as their vision does change, folks won't follow along. They won't know what the main goal is. And I think the KPIs are maybe a brightly colored version of the bullet points of that vision, is helping understand what the goals are, what the targets are, and creating the team dynamic around that. Incentives are one way to do that. Celebrating small successes around it is another way. Just making sure everybody's looking in the same place to ask themselves what the score is of the game. All right, so that's the from the top. I guess let's look at this from an accountability perspective. Phil, how are you seeing teams using the KPIs to drive accountability?
Yeah, I think that's a function of the ownership of what ultimately those KPIs are representing, right? If a KPI is around sales pipeline, the fact that the sales team has ownership around it and understands what those numbers are is important, right? So this and what our tools allow for us to do is give everyone this information so that when the team gets together, there's no finger pointing or I don't know where that information came from, but rather it's everyone has a lens level of knowing what's going on, having accountability towards meeting the metrics, right? And we do this in our business all the time. There's a certain level that we're saying, above this is good, below this is bad, and the KPIs, give us that objective answer to say, are we on track or are we not? It's a quantitative way of, assessing that as opposed to maybe a more qualitative, how do things feel? That can kind of go sideways versus, hey, the objective data is telling us this, but what are we going to do about it? And there are people that own that, own those assumptions and own that, kind of decision tree or an awareness and there's good team collaboration and discussion around this, then we're doing our job right.
Yeah, and I think going sideways might be dodging a conversation that needs to happen, and we've seen this in some businesses, Phil, where a month goes by, CEO's on vacation, the strategy meeting kind of gets punted, and all of a sudden, nobody's really paying attention to and driving the improvement. So, Augie, looking at you as the analyst in the room, how are you seeing improvement occur? If the vision's there and the accountability is there, how does the next step of actually improving upon that occur?
What I've seen is when you give visibility to people who previously might not have had quite that level of visibility, a lot of times they take it upon themselves to improve their performance. And in lieu of that, it's, all the different organizing dashboards sort of make it really clear at the individual meetings who dropped the ball, if anybody.
I like what you said there, because I think there is, I think all three of us fall into the millennial bucket, even if it's just by a couple of years. There's been a lot of finger pointing from generations about, well, this generation does this, and this generation does that. And, they don't work hard enough. And, they're always, working under their desk and whatever. Ultimately, I think that, yes, technology changes rapidly, but people are pretty similar and will usually be incentivized if given information to do the right thing, right? And if not, then you hired probably the wrong person. But if you've got the right people and they're looking at the right numbers and things are either not going the right direction or you can see what would take it in the right direction, most people will step up and do something. But it's your responsibility for building a structure that works and delivering it in a way that they're used to getting information. So if you bury it in a 100-page Excel report, they might not be looking at it. But if you put it on a screen, there's only 3 numbers and that one's theirs, game on. All right. So building a foundation for success, Phil, as we think about KPIs and the process of how to build them out, we're looking here on the screen at a big build. This is a large commercial building that probably AI drew up for $50 million plus. But how do you start small? How do you just start this month? Just start tracking?
Yeah, I think, what you said just now is you don't need to track everything, right? And I think we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier where, find what are the most important things you need to be tracking, right? And I think, if you're just picking a couple and making sure those are right, it's going to be a much more fruitful exercise than trying to identify a dozen and, create a bunch of complex reporting around that, right? I think it's keeping this process efficient and focused so that way you can, drive that accountability is important. So, it's not getting out over your skis and just, start small, start with a couple of, the most important things, you need to be tracking and, give it itself an honest assessment around how good of a job you're doing to make that data meaningful.
Okay, wonderful. Embrace technology. I'll tackle this one. I can't tell you how many times we onboard a client, we get everything set up, and we give them access. It's part of our 90-day process. Usually happens in the first couple of weeks. And we get to like month 2, and the CEO still hasn't logged in. We're like, okay, did we send it across? Did you forget your password? Like, well, hey, it's just one more thing. Sorry, I haven't done it. Well, you got to embrace technology. I mean, I think so. In this day and age, if you're not leaning in, you're getting kicked out pretty soon. So I think this might not be our technology, right? This might be a spreadsheet. This might be, getting your admin to print it out and put it on the whiteboard for the meeting that happens every week. But you've got to get this information in front of folks. And we know that we're, a fingertip away from having pretty much access to anything that we can possibly imagine. So that one's critically important. And then Augie, you already talked about engaging the team and getting this kind of shared understanding after the transparency kicks in, and then promoting accountability, and that folks will tend to just kind of fall in line and do what makes sense because, they understand the vision. So let's talk about some KPI pain points with a couple of questions from the field. Thank you everyone out there for submitting your questions. We've got John. He's an owner of Steel Frame Builders. Our team struggles with tracking too many KPIs and it's overwhelming. How do we simplify this? Looking at you, Phil, for an answer.
I guess, John, luckily is you've over-rotated and, at least you've got a pool of information to work with, right? And I mean, I think it's really as simple as skinnying them down. A lot of the times we'll work with our clients and we'll find that a lot of them are redundant. It's kind of 3 or 4 KPIs that are effectively measuring the same thing, and ultimately you kind of, you can't really change the decision making you're making on one versus the other. So doing a good old fashioned audit, and like we were alluding to earlier, is, you had to stack rank them from the most important to the least important. And then, when you say you have too many, start by cutting half, cut 75% of them, right? You should really have, no more than 10 to 15 in a larger organization. If you're thinking about one of these dashboards, right? You want that many tiles at most with numbers on them kind of pointing you in the right direction. So if you've got too many, put them on a list, organize them, ask your team, right? What do you guys think is the most important? And then you start hacking away from there. And ultimately, that usually what we found is leads to a lot less strain in reporting, right? Where it's, some people are running around doing a lot of reporting that isn't going anywhere and it's not really that beneficial. So this ultimately will be an exercise in freeing up capacity for someone downstream who's responsible for organizing the data for all these superfluous KPIs you've got in your tracking.
Yeah, I just tapped into this the other day in a post about, the owner doesn't realize that when they ask, especially a large group in a meeting, well, who's got that number? And nobody has it. Like, they just created a task for everybody in the room, whether they meant to assign it or not, of like, get me that number. And people will scramble, spend the rest of the day, the week, and not be doing their core job because they're running around trying to just serve the owner because they're afraid that, maybe their job's at risk, even though, he might have been asking himself who's responsible for that number, or she might have been asking herself. Speaking of she, we got Amanda, owner of Brightpath Construction Consulting. She says, I feel like my team doesn't take KPIs seriously. How do I create buy-in? And she's looking at Augie for the answer because you've already told her how to do this, but go ahead and repeat it, please.
Yeah, like we said, making sure that everybody has visibility on the KPIs and is aware of their role in driving them. That's a huge part in creating like a self-starting culture at your workplace. And I think you can identify who those people are and who they aren't very swiftly. And as long as you're hiring in that vein, then simply making people accountable and aware and check up on that. Don't just put a task out and wait for it to come back to you. You want to have these kind of like weekly, monthly, quarterly meetings where everybody's holding each other accountable. And you'll be surprised how often people pick up the pace.
Amanda says, thanks. All right. Key takeaways, leveraging the power of KPI. So understand the fundamentals. You should now understand the difference between leading and lagging indicators and how to measure them. Identify the key metrics that matter most for your business and how to track them effectively, and then align those KPIs with your goals. Sounds easy, a little bit more challenging as we're hearing from the field, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth doing. So I want to bring us in to basically a wrap here. I want to thank everyone out there on LinkedIn and YouTube for watching. I want to thank our guests, Phil Maffei and Augie, for joining me. And that is another episode of Financial Clarity Live. Thank you.